One. So welcome to this lecture today. I do believe the sound should be perfect with you, Keith.
Yep, fine.
Good. We've made improvements with the sound since. So today we're going to be looking at a historical based and archaeological based lecture looking at our wonderful Aboriginal friends of the continent of Australia. Now, the word Aboriginal seems to be used all the time now. It's used to describe Aboriginal peoples in Africa. It's used to describe Aboriginal peoples in North America, in Asia. But the true Aboriginals, and I will implore you with this one, that the true Aboriginals are always going to be the Australian Aboriginals. They will always be that. You know, the usual terms, abos, Aboriginals and so on. But, you know, from a child, it's a people that I've always, you know, been able to respect. You know, we've all gone through different levels of racism and misunderstanding of cultures, but I've always loved the Aboriginal, no matter what anyone's ever said to me. So the first image we do have is of 3 Aboriginals, and these Aboriginals show a side of Australia that usually we don't see, and that side of Australia, these individuals shown in a state of enslavement, and that is a very good place to be starting. And I used to think that you know, the abolition of slavery in Britain was in 1807. And I did also believe that people who were kept as slaves in the British Empire was abolished in 1833. But excuse me for saying this, but I know that photography wasn't really introduced until very much until about the 1860s. People really didn't start to use photography until the 1860s. So this photograph shows you an image of Aboriginals that are kept as slaves into the 1900s. And a very terrible fact to give you is that there's still reports of Aboriginals being kept as slaves in Australia into the 1970s. So all these lies that we've been told about the abolition of slavery in Britain and the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, again, are more indications of complete lies. In fact, 150 years later, people are still kept as slaves in the British Empire. And I wanted to highlight that. And I wanted to start off looking at the historical precedents in regards to Australian Aboriginal archaeology. And that's what we'll call it. We can't call it Australian archaeology. We've got to call it Australian Aboriginal archaeology. And the reason why we need to start there is because even today they see Australian archaeology as not just being Aboriginal archaeology. There's 3 elements to Australian archaeology. One is in the forethoughts of most Australians and most people who look at Australia, historical archaeology. In fact, Australia didn't begin until about the late 1700s. That's what lots of people think, and I still believe that today. That's the historical archaeology. So we're looking at colonial archaeology. So that's where most of the money's been placed into in regards to the archaeology of Australia. The next bit of that, the second bit of Australian archaeology, is nautical maritime archaeology. And guess what? Up until this year, well, up until last year, up until this year when it was reported, we hadn't had one Aboriginal maritime site explored. Nobody had explored any Aboriginal maritime archaeology. Nobody had done it. And that's quite traumatic for me to be looking at that. So in fact, a whole people and their maritime past, a landscape that was extensively has been extensively overrun by the sea, where we've got large levels of native archaeology. None of that has been interpreted until now. So again, that's a stark piece of evidence. And the other thing as well is that we've got a subfield of Australian archaeology that finally looks at Aboriginal archaeology. So this lecture itself is a full respectful lecture of an area that we never ever go to. You know, what I should be doing today, what would be better, maybe for some of you, if your minds are not swayed by my argument, it would be better to look at this wonderful Aboriginal art. There's much in the way of Aboriginal art, but recently in the Rio Tinto case, a whole cave network was blown up that contained Aboriginal art, and the company Rio Tinto, which is an American company, apologized to the Australian people for destroying this art because they said they didn't know it was there. So this is how a whole culture is treated. And Gough will know, and Ellen will know, and Pam will know that the lectures that we were doing on a Wednesday evening were very nationalistic. They would be saying that the culture of Cymru, the heritage of Cymru, the archaeology of Cymru has been ignored, you know, and I tried to address that over 24 weeks. And we did a really good job of addressing areas of our own archaeology that nobody knew about. But the difference is that we've recorded most of our native archaeology. It's just getting it out there. It really is. But in regards to native Australian archaeology, most of this hasn't got out there yet. Most of it hasn't even been researched or dug into. Now, from the standpoint of reading anything today, from what I've got in front of me on the screen, this wonderful publication I've got in front of me, it's argued over and over again that that the Aboriginals entered Australia. Some used to say 30,000 years ago, and then they said 40,000 years ago. They come from they entered Australia from Africa. So I know I made a mistake there. So they entered Australia from Africa, and then they say, oh, they entered Australia from Africa 70,000 years ago. So and then it'll go on, and then one day they'll say, oh, we found evidence of Aboriginals going back 120,000 years ago, and they would say they came from Africa. And there's a problem with that, because slight problem, because modern humanoids didn't leave Africa, some say, until about 50,000 years ago. How the hell could they have got to Australia before they got into Europe? And then you start to smell a rat. There's something queer and very distorted about what we're looking at today. And I'll try and fill as many facts in there as we can, and to get my bias away from this lecture. But I'm very biased pro Aboriginals. So if that's coming across, I do apologise, but maybe in this circumstance, I will like to be excused for that. So anyway, let's carry on. Yes, we are going to go on to another slide. So these three individuals in front of you, clearly slaves around their necks. Now, there's 2 points. There's 2 points about this. On Monday, when I tried out the lecture on Monday, one of my students on Monday, I've only got a very small class on a Monday, and it's the only live class that I've been doing for quite some time. And on a Monday, one of my students kept saying the Aboriginals could not have evolved out of Africa. And I said, you've got to be very careful what you're saying. He said they couldn't have evolved out of Africa. Look at them. They're very different from any other populations on the planet. And I'm thinking, right, we've got to do this in a non-racist way. We cannot say that Aboriginals are not humans. So then I went down another track. I said, well, what is the definition of humanity? The definition of humanity is the evolution of Homo sapiens, the evolution of Homo sapien Neanderthals, Denisovians. It's the evolution of interbreeding. It's in evolution of all that. So just because we find Homo sapien Neanderthal genes within our pool doesn't mean to say that we're not human. It doesn't mean to say we're not in humanity. So even if, and this is the point, we can't really understand the DNA yet. We can't really track where Aboriginals actually come from. Did they actually come from Asia? Could Australian Aboriginals have evolved from Asia? And the question is, we can't really understand the DNA yet. We're struggling understanding the DNA. And I said, what we need to be saying is that the Aboriginal population, they're humans, they're hominids. The description of hominids is basically that range. Anything that is hominid, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo sapien, they're all hominids. So we're all hominids on this planet, no matter where we've evolved from. So I needed to get that out there. So after I'd got that out there and we'd really understood that and we'd really explored what that meant, I've got to be honest with you, and I've told him he's an idiot. On Tuesday, one of my students, he turned around and said, this image in front of him was faked. He said there's no evidence of Aboriginals being enslaved after 1833. It's absolute nonsense, and I've not seen anything like it. But everybody in the class turned against him. And then after the break, I said, this is the evidence. We've got report after photograph after report after report of Aboriginals being used as slaves in Australia into the 1850s, 1900s, 1950s, and 1970s. And I said, how do you explain Tasmanian Aboriginals still being shot at sight in 1947? It's all lies. And then he said, oh, actually, even if you are seeing chains around their necks, these are criminals. At that point, I had to turn him off, and I had to turn him off because I just thought this is disgusting, really racist language, and I really struggled with that. So the lecture that we're going to be looking at next week is looking at Peking Man. Now, that's really important. And I'm probably spending a lot more in areas that maybe you don't want me to spend in, but I'm trying to introduce a whole continent in one lecture. And I'm trying to introduce the history and the archaeology. And then in another lecture, we can look at other sides of the Aboriginal world. Without knowing, without having these time signs, without this depth that I'm trying to go into, you can't hope to understand their art. Next week, we're going to look at Peking Man. Now, yes, okay, Peking duck, and all those wonderful things. We can have those jokes, but I'm in a very serious mood today. So Peking Man, this was a set of remains that was found in the late 1930s. In China, yes, Peking. And when these remains were found, people were horrified because they turned out to be the earliest remains of any hominids ever found on this planet in Asia, not in Africa. The very earliest human remains found in Asia. And everybody said, no, this cannot be true. And the remains, the remains were found by archaeologists that were not in the know. They were not the Leakeys. Now the Leakeys had been looking in the Olduvai Gorge, the Rift Valley, for the early origins of humanity for a few decades, up until, okay, actually a decade and a half, up until Peking Man was found, right? And everybody said, no, this is wrong. And then another skull was found. And unfortunately, Peking was captured by the Japanese, and the museum went up in flames, and the evidence went, right? So any evidence to say that the Aboriginals evolved from Asia ended that day, that very moment. And everybody has said that the evidence was faked. But next week, we'll see that the evidence, from what I can find, was not faked. But then we go to the Rift Valley, and we found loads of tools in Tanzania. It is in Tanzania, Kenya. It's within that sort of area. It's between the two. And then in the 1950s, they eventually found footprints, Latotai footprints, and then they found Lucy, and then they found all these remains, and then suddenly human evolution comes from Africa. And then you can understand the bias that the absolute crap I've got to put up with in archaeology every single week, because when you get somebody who's more academically superior to anybody else, their view is the view that everybody has to go along with. I do not believe that we only have one evolutionary route from Africa. It's the old adage: if you search hard enough, you find something. So obviously, if you're in a perfect relationship with somebody, if you look for faults, you will find them. If you don't look for faults, you're not going to find them, and you can have a perfect relationship. The apple cart was upset when people were so anally obsessed with finding remains in Africa that they found them. Tell you what, when the Chinese find early origins of human evolution in Asia, people still won't believe it. And I tell you what, that's going to happen in Australia. That will happen in Australia. And lots of these predictions, all of these things that I talk about now, about 8 years ago, right? We had a lecture in Cumbria, and one of the guys, Andy, is still with us. I said, Andy, we're now looking at North America, right? And this was 8 years ago. And in North America, they had found a site that saw people get into North America 15,000 years ago. They had moved the origins of people in North America back 500 years. My God, it was a watershed. And I said, Andy, this isn't the end of this. The end of this. I tell you what, in 5 years' time, they'll move the boundaries to the early origins of North America back 5,000 years. And you know what, guys? I was wrong. They moved the boundaries back 15,000 years. I was out by 10,000 years, and that is a good wrong. And then I say that North America, they were going to find early origins, the development of people in North America, getting to North America. We don't know any more than that, you know. I'm not going to go and say that humanoids have developed in North America. I'm not going to say that, right? But when they got to North America, you could have a boundary going back 50,000 years or more. Right, so all of this is linked. All of this early stuff is linked. But what we've got to take the subjective and the objective. We've got to put it together, and we've got to really understand what's going on. And what we've got to do, we've got to see the evidence for what it is. I've always said this, and when I say I've always said this, I used to say many years ago that that you should have archaeologists digging up the archaeology, giving you dates. And then you should have historians interpreting those dates. You should not have a historian and archaeologist doing the same thing. Well, that's what I'm doing now. I'm doing a history and archaeology. I'm doing the both, right? But what I'm trying to say is that the archaeologist is there to present the evidence, and the historian is there to interpret it, right? So the archaeologist can say, look, we've got 100,000 years ago. Let the historian go off on a channel. We're going to find more evidence, and it's going to be 120,000 years ago, and so on. So the biggest problem to interpreting the archaeology in Australia has to be that statement in front of you. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land, right? There's a bit of a problem with that statement. Most Aboriginals believe that they belong to the land. They don't own the land, right? But that is in Western language for Westerners to understand. In other words, the whole of Australia was once occupied by the Aboriginals. Legally, it is their land, but to the Aboriginal, they belong to the land. But to talk to thick Westerners, you've got to get Westerners to believe that they were there first. And up until very recently, Westerners used to say, you, let's do it in a derogatory term, you Abos, you've only been there 1,000 years. We've been here for, 300 years, say, right? We've got evidence of people knowing that this is here before Captain Cook and all the rest of it. We've been here for 300 years. So in fact, we own the land. We've got as much right to the land as you, right? And that's the problem. It's very similar to South Africa and Great Zimbabwe and Mapungubwe and the sand caves and all the rest of it. Is that level of bias to keep the South Africa government intact and Smith in charge of Rhodesia, to keep those countries under Western control. They had to argue that they had been there as long as the native peoples, and they would subvert any archaeological evidence disagreeing with that. And again, it's what I've had to put up with all my life. From my ethnic background, I've had to put up with that all my life. I'm also of this nationality in Cymru, and it's been treated as a second-class citizen all my life. But these Aboriginals have been treated as second-class citizens to a much more greater degree than some of us have. So we can't have any level of empathy. We can just try and understand, but it's a very interesting area. And I've just got to move. I've got a dying animal in my lap, so I've got to try and be with it when it passes. This image itself is going back to my notes. My notes tell me that there's two distinctive types of Aboriginals. There's Aboriginals from this area known as the Torres Strait, which is closest to Papua New Guinea, and then you've got the Aboriginal mainlanders. But for the sake of argument, for the sake of this, right, it's like saying that North Walians are different from South Walians, right? It's all one category to me today. I'm just trying to look at an area that most of us has never looked at before, and I'm talking down as some of you may have already examined Australian archaeology. I don't really know. I haven't asked that question, but you've got to think that from the 1970s, archaeological research was concerned with the environment and the way it impacted on humans. And what do we mean by that? The environment and the way it impacted on humans. So it's more about the environment rather than the people that once occupied the land, which is really important. This is in the 1970s. And only in the late 1970s do we see cultural heritage management. So in other words, Aboriginal sites, Aboriginal sites were slowly starting to be of interest to the Australian government. Now, in my lifetime, we've seen slaves, and in my lifetime, we've seen suddenly that the Australians and their connection with the landscape and as a people are starting to gain prominence. And there's a link here with an area of the British Isles. Okay, forget my pseudo nationalism, right? I've been to Shetland, and I tell you what, I loved Shetland. I met my supervisor for the university there. We went around. We stayed with this wonderful woman, and me and Michelle had a really nice time. And there was a sub level to all that level of fantasy being in Shetland. In the 1980s, as late as, say, the 1990, the native archaeological evidence of Shetland was still being blown up to build roads with no archaeological work on them at all. We were being told that there was whole Viking villages that were being blown up and not recorded. And this is the archaeology of Shetland. This is in Britain. It was completely disregarded, and it was only in the 1990s, well, actually in the late 1980s, when they actually had their own archaeologists. And I'm not saying that the Shetlanders are backwards. They're really nice, intelligent, really diverse. They're really nice people in Shetland, except for the bus drivers. But it's happening here. So I'm sure the Shetlanders can have a level of empathy in regards to the Aboriginals. So currently, the archaeological research places great importance today. This is where we're at. This is why we're starting to look at submerged sites. There is now an urgency, but with some sites, even now, the Rio Tinto case, which we will, which I think we might look at before the break. Even in the Rio Tinto case, Aboriginal sites are still just being blown up, they're being destroyed forever with no recording. But people are now being taught in schools that Aboriginals do exist. They are being taught in schools that Aboriginals, it's their country. And consideration is given to their belief structure, what archaeological sites mean to them. And they're not just seeing the Aboriginals as like Caerphilly Castle or artifacts in the British Museum. They're seeing Aboriginals as their past, their present, and their future has an intercourse and dialogue together. So what we mean by that is, say you get a piece of datable Aboriginal art from 10,000 years ago. Aboriginals believe that that art is living and that they can add to it. So in course of that, what we're talking about is that it's like looking at one of Van Gogh's work and saying, right, Van Gogh's work is current and we're going to add to it. And I'm sure we'd all think, oh my God, that's absolutely disgusting. But for the Aboriginal, past, present, and future is one moment. It's all together. It's that sort of dream space. It's all that stuff that we will do when we look at Aboriginal art. It's all that same thing, and it's the same as when I show somebody an ancient Greek coin or an ancient Roman coin, and I put the coin in their hand. So here we go. I haven't got a coin on my desk actually, but for example, I'm giving that person a coin. I've handed them a coin. There it is, and I say, look at that coin, and they say, yes, it's an old coin, and I say, that coin itself dates from Ptolemy the 5th of Egypt, and I say, oh, that's interesting, and that coin itself hasn't travelled in time in over 2,000 years. In fact, that coin is exactly the same coin that somebody would have looked at 2,200 years ago. And they say, oh, that's fascinating. And I say, it's more than fascinating. That coin is a time capsule. That is in the past, it's in the present, it's in the future. It will not change. And still people can't get that concept. But this is what the Aboriginal Australians believe. So what I've got to really do is actually read out what's in front of me, and then you know that I sort of disagree with it. But this map in front of you is a map of the Australian Aboriginal sites that the Australian Aboriginals have been allowed to call their own. So the orange area itself is traditional native Aboriginal homelands. The sort of blue areas have got a level of prominence. And all these other areas are seen to be disputed between the Aboriginals and the Western authorities that now run Australia. And to be honest with you, the whole land itself, in my eyes, belongs to these individuals. Well, I showed that image to this guy on Tuesday. Garth knows exactly what I'm talking about, but I don't want his name dropped. On Tuesday, he said, "Oh, these are all criminals." I said at that point, I turned off the mic. And these individuals are slaves, and they most of these are from one tribal grouping. You can tell from the markings on their chest. So we look at these images from the late 1890s going into the 1900s, and this is 70 years after slavery was abolished in the British Empire. Another lie from history. So let's look at this. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this out. I've got my opinion that we have some level of evolution of current day Aboriginals in Australia, but this, what I'm about to read, disagrees with that, but you've got to make up your own mind. So the first settlement of Australia is a popular research topic, both in archaeology and in the public arena. There is consensus that no human or closely related species evolved independently in Australia. This is because there have been no species of primate found in Australia, either in the present or in the fossil record. And you know how I'm explaining that. You know, if people had been looking for early primates in Australia, they would have probably found them by now. And don't make them up as Charles Dawson made it up in 1812 in regards to the Piltdown Man forgery. It is therefore assumed that the first settlers assumed, now that's where I'm from, it is therefore assumed that the first settlers in Australia came from outside. At present, the fossil record suggests that the first settlers were Homo sapiens, or fully modern humans. And as I've already told you why I disagree with that. Because if you've got evidence, as we will now see, of people in Australia going back 75,000 years ago, and modern anatomical humans really only left Africa about 50,000 years ago, how could they have travelled in time to get to Australia? Anyway, let's just carry on reading. That's my thought. It might not be yours. There is controversy over where the first Australian Aboriginals originated, and it's postulated that the first settlers were fully modern humans. Asian genetic studies have demonstrated that there are similarities between Australian Aboriginals and Melanesians and Indians from that subcontinent, from India itself, and that they didn't evolve directly from waves of people coming from Africa. But that's even more interesting because it's discounting the Chinese link. However, the suggested date of 60,000 years ago for initial settlement is quite early when compared to other areas of the world. Now, I'm going to keep something here that I want to put into your minds like a little worm, and I want you to think about it. Right, so we'll read that out there again. Now, right, so here we go. So 60,000 years ago and going up to 75,000 years ago, for initial settlement is quite early when compared to other areas of the world, right? So some of the earliest burials that we've got on the planet are from Australia, right? Some of the earliest full burials are actually from Australia, right? Dating back in excess of 40,000 years ago, right? We don't find full burials of more or less intact humans in Britain until Cheddar Gorge Man, I think that dates back to between 12 and 10,000 years ago, right? So the earliest full burials, and don't mention Paviland Cave because you know what I feel about the evidence of Paviland Cave. So the earliest evidence of actual proper burials actually comes from Australia. So that's one thing. The other thing as well is some of the earliest evidence of anatomical humans, or similar to anatomical humans, or describe what an anatomical human is. Some of the most intact evidence of early fires and all the rest of it actually comes from Australia, right? So if most of the early evidence comes from Australia, why do we presume that it comes out of Africa? Anyway, we'll leave that there. So carrying on with my notes, this may suggest that Australian Aboriginals derive from an early African population, which migrated along the south coast of Asia at a much faster rate than other populations migrating across the continent. So in other words, they knew Australia was there and they wanted to get there. Is that what they're saying? Like we know, you know, somewhere over there, right, there's Australia, we're going to go there, right? I know. The first settlement of Australia most likely occurred during the last glacial maxim. And what a glacial maxim is when the Earth is at its coldest. Now that could be argued. It could be argued that hang on. It could be argued. It could be argued that you could get to Australia if there's a land bridge because the land is frozen. You could get to Australia via boat, but that's another area that we'll go on to. But it was once thought, and I will show you this now via another image, so which will help me illustrate. Take care, guys. See you again. Yes, I love that smile. But anyway, this is what I want to show you. If we can zoom in on this a minute. So if we look at the top of the screen, we can see the word sunder. Now that is where we're going to go. So it was once thought that more or less the entire Asian continent was connected to Australia. Now, it's very likely that the Sunder Shelf, not named after Sunderland, S-U-N-D-A, Sunder Shelf, it was once thought that, you know, 100,000 years ago was complete to Australia. About 60,000 years ago, as you can see on the plan, there's still a bit of blue water. You've still got to cross 100, 120, 130 miles to get to Australia. And you probably wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. So it's said during this time, at the maxim of the last ice age, between about 60, 40,000 years ago, a mass number of people basically walked over to Australia, jumped in a few boats, and that was it. And then from that moment onwards, this is how we see the Australian indigenous population developing. But unfortunately, we've got evidence of people in Australia a lot earlier than that. But this is what people say. The people that we see now in Australia got to Australia via the Sunder Shelf, whether it was one land bridge or whether it was a land bridge with a bit of water in between, about 60,000 years ago. And any people who were in Australia before that were exterminated by these new people coming in. You know, the usual thing. Homo sapiens sapiens chasing Homo sapien Neanderthals all around the planet, knowing that they're there exterminating, and that usual hogwash, right? But anyway, other dates have suggested that this time frame is not as conclusive as it makes out. That's what I'm saying. Some experts say that even 100,000 years ago, you always had to cross to Australia via a water crossing. In fact, some have argued that Australia has never ever been linked to the Sunda Shelf and Asia, you'd have always had to have crossed some kind of open water. So with all this said, I would like to mention some names of places. So there's a place known as Rottnest Island, which is just off the Australian coast. We've got evidence from that site going back to 70,000 years ago. We've got tool evidence, we've got evidence of fires, and we've got to go to a site known as Lake Mungo as well, a wonderful site known as Lake Mungo. And now we're going to look at this chart that we've got in front of us. And we're looking at radiocarbon dating and all the rest of it. So, right, I'm going to, there you go. Now, it's quite a nice colourful chart, isn't it? It's quite a nice colourful map. I've got some more to go with my notes as well. So if we zoom in, get my arrows in there, right? That is the modern day coastline of Australia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. And this is the Sunda Shelf, which heads all the way through to Timor. And then you've got a big island, a mass, and then you've got the Australian coastline as it would have been 60,000 years ago. Some say that the landscape lost around 60,000, between 60,000 and 40,000 years ago, when the Sunda Shelf was inundated with tidal waves and the landscape was flooded. Some say that the landmass of Australia was a third bigger than it is today. So the coastlines would have been more excessive than that. Away from the coastline of Australia, there was a mean average of coastline that went out about 150 miles from where it is today. So those are really important points. So from even when we go there, the assumed evidence for early movements of people and early evolution would not be, so if we can get rid of those arrows, would not be on the land. The evidence for early Aboriginals would be under the water. And we're only starting to look at here, the first Aboriginal site, which is 2.5 meters under the water. It's assumed, for example, that all that area under the water is going to be your earliest Aboriginal evidence. And the answer is very few people have been looking at it. In fact, so few people have been looking at it that we've only got one set of archaeological data. Now, that's all we've got. So if you want to really find early Australian roots, right, you're looking in the wrong place. You've been looking in the wrong place from day one. It's actually under the water. And all those upper class, pompous archaeologists with PhDs and professorships in wonderful universities, denying the origins of these Australian Aboriginals need to be ashamed of themselves because they've been looking in the wrong place from day one. The other interesting thing about this chart is quite bizarre, right? These same experts, not all of them, but these same experts. So I need to hang on a minute. I've got to move that. So if we look at this, these same experts have then said, right, you had Aboriginals going this way. They went all the way this way. They're still saying that they went via the sea, but they've got no evidence, right? So they sort of went. A few of them went over land, and then they went this way, and they went this way, and they went this way, and it's still keeping in the sea, right? They're saying that they went via the sea, but they haven't got the evidence for it either. But I'm saying that they went via the sea, and now we've got the evidence. So there's a difference. And the unusual thing about this is, right, is that if you look at this, and we'll zoom in on it again. So let's get rid of that. Come on, let's. I need that up. If we zoom in on this again, some of the earliest excavated evidence on this map, you know, we've got the other evidence going back to 70,000 years ago, but the main, big, largest evidence that we've got excavated are from, now this site is around 50,000 years ago. That site's around 50,000 years ago, right? But the weirdest thing is the younger sites are in the north, and the older sites are in the south. So that shouldn't be the case. Surely the older sites, if people are coming from Asia and Africa, the older sites should be in the north and the younger sites should be the south. You don't, it doesn't make any sense, right? So therefore, the equation is, back to what I've already said, to not confuse all of you in any one moment. The evidence for this site 40,000 years ago, the really earliest settlers for this site probably settled here around 50,000 years ago, right? So in turn, the people who settled at this site were probably on this part of the coastline about 60,000 years ago, and you go on and on and on. And then for people to have got here, they must have actually been here about 70,000 years ago and 80,000 years ago, and the dates go back and back and back and back. This is what I'm trying to say. The archaeology hasn't really been scrutinized as much as it should be. And that's a point I'm trying to make. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to look at, we're not going to go here. We're not going to do the talk about this yet. This is Lake Mungo. I'll show you where Lake Mungo is. Hang on a minute. Where's my little doodah? There's Lake Mungo. Bingo. There's our Lake Mungo. So we're not going to do Lake Mungo yet. I've got a lot to do before we do Lake Mungo. So I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to do that. And I want to, we'll keep that chart up there. If you all don't, and do you know what I should be saying is everybody keep their phones off. And I've got to put that there. It's now off. What I'm going to do is that since I've updated, my computer's updated overnight, so I've lost the article online about Rio Tinto. So I do apologize for that. Rio Tinto, Aboriginal, there we go. And right, here we go. There's this article. So what we're going to do, we're going to go off the lecture for a minute. We're going to go back to the lecture, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to do the Lake Mungo stuff. So I'm going to share this on the screen. This is another article. I haven't actually read out this one in full, but I will re-show you some of these images at the end. So let's work out screen share, and we share. Bingo. So can you see this? Can you see this? Yep. Excellent.
Rio Tinto expected, yeah.
Right, good. So we're going to read this out. Rio Tinto. Now this article itself is from, I do believe, September. Oh, there we go, September. Rio Tinto, that company, an American company, expected to destroy 124 more Aboriginal sites. Indigenous owners raise concerns at inquiry into mining corporations' demolition of the Junkan Gorge caves. So in other words, they're just demolishing it. They're absolutely destroying. And they're doing it by accident, by the way. They didn't know it was there. The Junkan Gorge, in a photograph taken days before, the 46,000-year-old caves were destroyed by Rio Tinto. They just blew them up. Oh, and they said it was an accident. I tell you what, let's all go out and kill somebody and say it's an accident, and I bet you won't get away with it. Do you know what I mean? You're not, you know, in a court of law, right? Ignorance, you know, I'm sorry. Mining giant Rio Tinto is feared to be pressing ahead with plans to destroy a further 124 Aboriginal heritage sites at an iron ore development in Australia, despite the outcry over its destruction of sacred 46,000-year-old caves this year. Among the threatened sites in the mountain region of Pilbara in the Western Australian are rock shelters containing Aboriginal paintings, Stonehenge-like arrangements and built structures that are believed to be of potential archaeological value. So in other words, you know, this is wantonly and being deliberately destroyed today. You know, you could think that this is being destroyed like 100 years ago, but this is being destroyed today. A group representing the indigenous residents of the affected area said that the Anglo-Australian Corporation had stopped short of promising a review into the actions following outrage over blasts that demolished the Junker Gorge rock shelters in May. This isn't May again, this isn't May 1950, this is May now, all right? So this company have stated in various forms that they will consider reviewing the agreement. We don't have a formal commitment. Grant Bushell says the Yinhagaka Aboriginal Corporation's chief executive told a public inquiry led by the Australian Parliament into the destruction of the Junker Gorge. Rio Tinto, the second largest metals and mining company in the world, received widespread criticism for its treatment of the site, which led to the resignation of its CEO. We have 327 sites and 124 will be destroyed by the Western Ranges expansion project by Rio Tinto. The inquiry revealed that Aboriginal groups had secretly been subjected to contracts banning them from objecting to mining developments on their ancestral land, prompting questions over whether they gave adequate consent. So in other words, they had been lied to. A bit like what happened to the Native Americans in North America. Oh, by the way, if we have a bit of your land, right, you can have it back next week. In a statement, Rio Tinto said that it was building on decades of deep engagement as it assessed the sites to gain better understanding of the cultural significance and values placed on these sites by the Ngaka people. It added that it had pledged to update its policy, including details around the issue of consent with all groups on whose land it operates in the region. And I do believe, hang on a minute, why have we got all these blooming adverts all of a sudden? And that's basically it. That's the article. So what do you feel about that, Keith?
Disgusting, basically. Mind you, I mean, I think Britain is probably as bad, you know, in the sites we destroy as well. But I presume there must have been surely some kind of archaeological investigation before these sites were given permission to go ahead.
There's no. I've not read any mention of any archaeological investigation until after this that has actually been mentioned.
Yeah, that's terrible, isn't it? I just didn't believe that things like that could still happen in the so-called civilized world.
Well, as near me, there's a place known as the Penrhys housing estate, right? And in the 1960s, it was synonymous with crime, and they used to, they used to empty prisons in Manchester, and they used to make them live at this estate, and there was a high crime rate and all the rest of it. But as they're building the estate, there was a monastery up there, and it was all bulldozed. It was all destroyed. It was all blown up, and the artifacts lost. Now we've that's in living memory. So,
5 Mile Lane.
Yeah. Need we say any more? Exactly, the 5 Mile Lane and the controversy associated with that. So, as a backdrop, what I'm going to do, we're not going to change the slide. We're going to, I'm going to read some more of these notes. So, the information that I got in front of me will be a bit of a review for what we've already looked at. So, this sort of clarifies everything I've said. So, until the 1950s, it was often believed that the arrival of the first Aboriginal people was within the last 10,000 years. In the 1950s, the dates were extended to the last Ice Age maximum, 20,000, then 40,000. And then in 1969, they started excavating at a site known as Lake Mungo, which we're going to look at after the break. And it's the analysis, more recently, the analysis of sea levels has shown that coastlines 40,000 years ago were not as exposed as they were 60,000 years ago. And the submergence of the earliest sites of occupation due to rising sea levels has meant that the earliest archaeological signature may in fact represent occupation much later than the initial time of arrival. So again, all of this stuff changes and alters, and different views and different senses, this sort of unbiased way I'm trying to do the lecture today. And then other archaeologists are saying that we've got radiocarbon dates going back 40,000 years ago. Another archaeologist argues that we've got evidence going back 70,000 years ago. Some have proposed dates extending back 120,000 years ago. The great ancestors of the current day Aboriginals, and them being in Australia date back to 120,000 years ago. 120,000 years ago, there was about 20 types of different hominids on the planet, including the Neanderthals, Denisovians, the people of the Flores Island, Homo sapiens, and so on and so on. So if it's going back that far, and if we want to look at this in the sensible way, we've now got to start investigating those sites and getting some decent information. And then we can talk about when people got to Australia, because we're nowhere near to understanding who these Aboriginal Australians actually are today. You know, somebody says, again, that DNA thing, what about the DNA? Can't the DNA tell you stuff? We haven't exactly examined all the strands of DNA. Some say, oh, we know what, no, we don't. We don't understand it all. We can't know. You know, DNA is so small, or what, the strands are so small. How can we possibly know everything? We don't. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to have a break, and there's something that I want to do that I haven't done. So I need to do that for those guys the people who were with me on Tuesday. I said I was going to show them a couple of aerial photographs and some mapping stuff. So I haven't actually got that on my computer yet. So I need to get that on my computer. But I'd like to mention that that a new book is out. If anyone's interested, it's called Rogues in Royal Robes, Exploring the Lives of Some Old Testament Kings and the Times in Which They Lived. This was written by Dr. Monty White, who's actually a member of my Progeny class. If anyone's interested in this, it's a wonderful publication, and you can get copies from us in the post. They're £10. That includes postage. If anyone wants a copy, let me know in the break. So what we're going to do, I'm going to also, the other thing as well is, don't forget, I need to know who's going to be on that walk on the 3rd of November, because I've got to send out educational passes for you to be on that walk, just in case you're stopped by anybody. So Keith, would you like to say anything now?
I'm lost for words. I think there's a lot of information there. I'm surprised that the DNA hasn't been able to identify things further. I've never heard of any kind of native Aboriginal structures at all. I'm not sure if they built them. Maybe you can enlighten us on that later on. No, you know, even like Easter Island and things like that, they have structures, but I've never heard of anything in Australia.
I got something about that here, so we'll do that.
Yeah. Okay, but that's fine for me.
Okay, Garth, what about you, darling?
It was all very interesting, and that company Rio Tinto's got history of doing some terrible things around the world.
Okay, well, can you enlighten us on some more?
Well, I know in America they've got into a lot of trouble, and in South America as well, and South Africa as well. So
they got no morals.
Well, a big company, very powerful.
Yeah, I can see that one. What about you, Sue? I got to unmute everybody. I don't want to unmute Chris, but I'll have to listen to her. Okay, everybody. Sue, quickly, everyone, just try and keep it brief.
Yeah, the whole thing about slavery is abhorrent. But the thing that's so upsetting is it's currently alive and well here in the UK.
Yeah, okay, we've got evidence for that. Yeah, so you're not even, you go into ground that we don't know. You're dead right. I agree. Jane?
No, very interesting. Yeah, it's very scary as well.
Yeah, it is very scary. And, you know, Keith mentioned it, so I'll mention it again. You know, what happened with myself in regards to with the 5 Mile Lane, making that public that day. You know, you all know what happened with my car and lots of other things, and it's a very dangerous area to go. And I would say that I'm sure Aboriginals who want to tell us about their history are getting similar problems, and obviously Rio Tinto, you can't get any more than that. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, Chris.
I just wondered if there was any evidence for things starting off in Australia and moving the other way. Oh, nobody's examined that, I presume.
This is where I'm coming from. This is exactly what I feel. When we look, I think we've covered a lot of that today, but when we look at Peking Man next week, you'll be more convinced of what you said than ever. So yes, I feel that way. Now that is the point. I said earlier on that lots of evidence indicates something going on early. So, okay, we know the Roman Empire came from Rome because look at Rome, the amount of evidence there. But if you compare that with Roman archaeological remains in London, there's hardly any. So from that, where you've got a large amount of evidence, surely that's pointing to something which is much more important than I'm actually making out. And what you're saying, Chris, that's me. Jim.
Yeah, a lot of the drawings you see of Neanderthals seem very similar to the facial features of the Aboriginals. I don't know, do you agree?
Actually, yeah, I will agree with that, because I will agree with that. Some of us have got heavy brows and heavy features like my nose. DNA, if you look back in our DNA, we've got more Neanderthal genes than other people. And it's nothing derogatory. It's just the fact that, you know, it's the way human evolution is. I've got a photograph of this young Aboriginal girl, and her features are absolutely beautiful. And you think, well, yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. Yes, Pam.
I just wonder about their art, the Aboriginal art.
We're doing that in the future.
And also what they eat. You know, do their features have anything to do with the way they eat, the way they live? And I understood they lived in the bush anyway. So do they still live in the bush?
Yes, they do. And lots of the evidence for buildings, and I'll check it in there, is in the form of fires and residual evidence rather than the buildings themselves. So that's probably answered Keith's question. Yes. And lots of evidence of flints and so on, not flints, stone axes and so on. So yes, so we got all that. So does that answers that, doesn't it? Yes.
Yes, it does.
Ellen, quickly, darling.
3. Godfrey's right.
He's always right.
Used to be RTZ, Rio Tinto Zinc, and they've got at least a 50-year history of constant violation of ecological and legal situations where they have just absolutely destroyed areas because of their mining. They're the most abysmal, appalling company in every way you can think of in terms of mining. They are terrible. The second thing is the worst film I have ever seen in terms of the devastating effect and the devastating enlightenment I've ever seen was Rabbit Proof Fence.
Yeah.
It was, I woke up for weeks after with the doom and gloom and the horror of what I had learned by watching that film. It was absolutely the depth of humanity was terrible. And then last of all, the Neanderthals, they are slightly different to most of the strains of Homo sapien. They had a much, much bigger brain capacity, at least 17% larger than any other type of humanoid found. So they seem to be sort of more in a class of their own. And I certainly think that Aboriginals do have a sort of an ethnic look about them, which is similar to loads of other ethnicities, like the Eskimos and Mongolians. They've all got their own ethnic roots, and they look so very specific to their true race and origin, don't they?
Like the Mongoloids as well.
Yeah.
For Mongolia, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that. And Karen, Karen, my stepchildren said, "Are you a Karen?"
Am I a what?
A Karen, apparently. Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Oh, are you talking about the tribe from Thailand? I've got a Thai tribe named after me.
No, don't worry, Karen. Have you got anything you want to say, quick?
No, I just had the same thought as Chris. That you know, could Australia be where we all originated from?
And I tell you what, the point I was making was that if the Leakey family had been working in Australia, right, they would have probably come across the same evidence. Because the Leakeys had been working in Australia for, start again, the Leakeys had been working in Africa since the 1920s. So if they've been working in Australia, putting the same effort into it, they would have found these early primates. Early primates are not easy to find. You can't just wander down the street and find a primate. It's like some dinosaur remains being found at Penarth. They found several sets now, but people have been wandering up and down that coastline for hundreds of years and found nothing. So it's the same thing. If you look hard enough, you'll eventually find it. And Andrea, quick, because we're going to have a break.
No, I got no more to say. Everyone said it.
Okay, good. Let's have a break.
Okay.
Oh, articles of the week as well.
I got permission for a break.
Articles of the week. So 11:56. That's quite a lot. We need to pause recording. 1. So I think the biggest problem for me now is actually getting back to where I was before the break, because there was a lot of passion in it, and I think it's probably a good time to do the next bit, because the passion's not as much there, and probably I can be a little bit less biased. So I wanted to look at a few images at the end of this lecture, and I wanted to look at a site known as Lake Mungo. And for those that don't know where Lake Mungo is, or who were not taking any notice of the lecture before the break, that's where Lake Mungo is. So basically, you've got this is where New South Wales is. And then below that, you've got Victoria. And then below that, you've got Tasmania and Hobart and all that type of stuff, right? So that gives you an idea. I don't know if any of you have been to Australia. Chris has probably been there on a cruise with Lynn. So I'm not even going to ask. So this is Lake Mungo, and Pam seemed to know a little bit about Lake Mungo. She said, enjoy Lake Mungo. So I like that. So I think the best thing I can do with Lake Mungo is to answer those questions that you might have. Lake Mungo, New South Wales, the site of, right, here we go. Back to what we said. Lots of early evidence, lots of concentrations of evidence that we don't find anywhere else in the world, going back to Chris's point. It's got the earliest evidence of a ritual cremation, where a set of human remains of a girl 25,000 years ago the body's been cremated, and then it's all been collected together, and then they've had a ritual. That's a ritual cremation dating back to 25,000 years ago. Why haven't we got that evidence from anywhere else? This was discovered in 1969. So 1969, just before that watershed where people were thinking, you know, Australia, Aboriginal. are the remains of more than the remains of more than 100 individuals have now been found. Well, actually, in excess of when this was written, so a few more than that. So we've probably got more sets of human remains from that date in one locality than anywhere on the planet. But still, Australia is seen to be a place that people went to rather than evolved out of. Close brackets. Many of these are fragmentary, but many of these are complete, virtual complete skeletons. Now, going back to, if you want to talk about Pavlan Cave, which I don't want to, you can say that if the Lady of Pavlan Cave dates to 28,000 years ago, these remains at this site date back to 40,000 years ago. So, you know, and Cheddar Gorge Man, 10,000 years ago. Again, all this stuff is a lot earlier. That's the point. So without Gough saying get on with it, you're making these points too much. I think it's more important that we get this into our heads. They found lots of evidence of stone tools. Now, yes, we've got stone tools of a really old age in Africa, but we've got stone tools from Boxgrove in Britain dating back 400,000 years ago. So, you know, there's lots of stone tools from different hominids. Freshwater mussel shells, yes, interesting, they're eating mussels. Bones of fish, again, interesting, they're eating fish. And one of you asked what type of animals were they eating? Lots of land animals. And going out of the box, modern day Aboriginals are eating the same things as these people ate 40,000 years ago. So if it's not broken, why change it? If this food is good, and well, obviously it can't be that bad because they're still alive today. Do you know, I'm going to say something really bizarre. My first experience of Aboriginals was not watching Crocodile Dundee, right? It was watching the Sullivans, wasn't it? That Australian program, or was it the Waltons, whatever it was? And you used to have occasional Aboriginals in that. And then there was a few programs from the 1960s. There was a couple of Aboriginals in them. And you started to get an idea who these people were. The Aboriginals always ate weird things and they danced strangely and all the rest of it. But I think that was a good introduction. I'm pleased I wasn't aware of this slavery element, because maybe that would have damaged my mindset. So what we're talking about, this itself in front of us, 15,000 years ago was full of water. This is a lake. This landscape was a large inland lake. And the point is, it's inland. It's not by the coast. It's inland. So these people had to migrate to this locality. So in 1968, they're looking at this landscape, and there's a geomorphologist. Obviously, geomorphology, that comes in with the mining and all the rest of it, and looking at changes and the climate. And he noticed here at this locality, very interesting, some burnt bones encrusted with carbonate, right? So these looked of age, with the carbonate on them. They looked of age. They were eroding out of this old, now deserted, crescent-shaped eastern shore of Lake Mungo. That's really descriptive. And this. So a team of archaeologists went there in 1969, a laboratory team, and it turned out that these remains were not the remains of any normal person. Wrong word to use. These remains were of a special person, somebody who was 25,000 years in date. The bones were of a young girl dating back 25,000 years ago. And this evidence came in 1969, when we're still learning this evidence. It's less than 20 years since radiocarbon dating's come to us via Willard Libby from the States, 1950, 1951. So in lots of ways, this is groundbreaking. And it's so groundbreaking that we're getting this groundbreaking technology in Australia first, or thereabouts. So again, reiterate, we've got the earliest known cremated ritual cremation, and her body had been burnt and the bones then ritualistically smashed into tiny pieces, which is nothing different to what happens with somebody cremated today. You're cremated, your body's placed into a roller, and then all that's put together and it's put into cremational jar. So in other words, that was done 25,000 years ago and not last week in a Barry crematorium. These were then collected and buried in a small depression. So that's there's a few things about this. The body's been deliberately buried, revolution, but the body was cremated, deliberately, smashed into tiny fragments, revolution. And not just buried, they were buried into a purpose dug depression in the ground. So all those elements come together as being very special. Australia, number one. These were then were not just the only most spectacular finds, not only just the date, but in 1974, an even more complete set of human remains were found. 1974. In fact, this was a complete set of remains. Complete. These were older than the remains that we talk about from Paviland Cave. These dated to in excess of 30,000 years ago, and this person had been deliberately buried rather than being cremated. And this is one of the most earliest sets of complete, deliberately buried sets of human remains found on this planet. One of them, it's not the only one. Okay, that would be really bad for me to say that. And there's something interesting as well about this, that the body itself is sprinkled with red ochre.
Oh, right.
Yeah, exactly. Lady of Paviland Cave, red ochre and all that jazz, job done. So the body is actually sprinkled with red ochre. We've actually got another body that dates to 41,000 years ago, which you will see has also been sprinkled with red ochre. So in a moment, we've got a body that's been buried. I don't really believe that the body was originally interred at the Paviland Cave. I think it came from somewhere else and the evidence was altered and all the rest of it. But the bones actually from Paviland Cave have been radiocarbon dating to 28,000 years ago or thereabouts. And they have been sprinkled with red ochre. Those are the facts wherever they were found from. So we do have human remains on the Gower from that date. But this date is a little bit before that, okay, in history. So both of those things have something in common. Inhumation, this is complete, other than the one at Paviland Cave. So the evidence is far better within this landscape than when you look at something like Paviland Cave. But you could argue that the level of preservation in Australia is going to be better. That's not necessarily the case. I won't say any more about that, though. Other sites around the lakes provide a vivid picture of the lives of the people and Keith who camped there when the lakes were full. That's giving you an idea of their sense of settlement and their sense of community. So they're very much in a temporary bent. They're very much in a temporary state of community. It's transient. It moves around. It's not sedentary based in one area. It moves around, right? You think about hunter-gatherers and all the rest of it, but when you think about the word hunter-gatherer, it's almost a derogatory term. So this is what the landscape looks like today, and that's what the landscape looks like today as well. So it looks very barren, but at one stage it was a very rich, plentiful landscape. And I think understanding this landscape today helps us understand how things have changed and animals and relationship and so on. But this is a point that I've not made all week, and I'm going to make it. This landscape has not been screwed around with by human beings. The landscape that we do see has been inevitably shaped by Mother Nature rather than the human condition. the human condition has extensively altered even the likes of the Amazon basin. But this landscape, from the way they're living, is quite respective and integral to the landscape rather than working against the landscape. So we can't blame human activity for the way the landscape looks like today. There's this great debate about the Sahara, human beings deforesting and all that friggin' nonsense, or is it nonsense? But this landscape hasn't been really mucked around with by human beings. So the evidence that we've got is from some of the bones they've excavated. We know that they're eating frogs and various types of fish, but there's one type of fish that they're eating more than anything, something known as the golden perch. We've got evidence that they're eating mussels and that they're eating crayfish. So this is naturally, all of these types of things are around today. You know, in all those crocodile Dundee things, I've not really seen an Aboriginal eating frogs, but obviously everything else on this list they're eating today. So we've got the evidence of fish bones and all that telling us of their biodiverse connection with their eating habits and how they're living within this integral, again, same word, landscape. And what you do see, this is Lake Mungo again, there's bones and all that stuff just sticking out the surface from not just 41,000 years ago, as we know, 25,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago, and maybe last week, where somebody wandered across this landscape and the human bones are there and so on and so on. So the sense of relationship with the food, a few other things we need to chuck in here. They are catching one main particular species of fish, other fish, but the one that they're going for is a golden perch. And the bones are all the same size. Well, most of them are the same size when they excavate them. So they're selectively fishing. So that means that they probably use nets. And obviously the nets are shaped in a certain way that the smaller fish can get out of the nets and all the rest of it. And they're selectively fishing. So that's another thing about their culture. So the people from the bones that we found eat wallaby, that's eaten today. Wombat, that's eaten today. Native cat, not sure about that one. As well as wide ranges of small animals like rat, kangaroos, and lizards, and all the types of things that are still eaten by the Aboriginal culture today, and so on. So obviously they were able to do that in the past. They're able to do it today. Can I just stop a minute? You know, Aboriginal culture is a lot more diverse than as I'm describing it. You know, we haven't done the cave art, which we will do. And there is one thing that has to be said and underlined and repeated. These people have lived within this landscape alongside Mother Nature for in excess of 40, 60, 70, 80,000 years. Their sense of civilization has succeeded, where inevitably in the West, our sense of civilization is continually failing. You've had the Roman Empire, it failed. You had the Anglo-Saxon world, it failed. The Viking world, it failed. The medieval period, it failed. All our forms of civilization have failed. Waves after waves of different people trying different things. But these are inevitably the same types of people doing the same things which work with Mother Nature that works. That makes them better than us. What we do see in answer to Keith's question is that throughout this landscape of Lake Mungo, we'll come on to this man in a minute. Throughout this landscape of Lake Mungo, what we do see is the evidence of some of the earliest campfires and also ground ovens. They've got ovens, you know, they're doing things. They go in places. They're cooking their food. They've got that that inferred link and understanding with the past. And there's definitely a lot more that can be said about this. So these ovens were shallow pits and contained ash or charcoal and cooking stones or lumps of baked clay. And what is a cooking stone? Well, there could be two interpretations for that. You could have two holes, one hole for burning and another hole which is full of water. And you take a stone into that vat of water, warm water, boiling water, you can boil your fish, crayfish, lush. And without doubt, we've all, well, some of us have tasted crayfish, it's great stuff. Ovens such as these are still used by Aboriginals today. So that's the one thing. This is why Aboriginal archaeology isn't easy, but it's easy. What I mean by that is that as an archaeologist looking at our civilization today and looking at past civilizations like a burnt mound, right? A burnt mound is a pile of stones, broken stones that have been burnt, right? And it's up to me to interpret that pile of stones that's been burnt, and then you can estimate that they're boiling water and all that stuff, right? However, with the Aboriginals, they're still doing that today. So what they're doing today, you can find a hole in the ground, two holes in the ground, and the Aboriginal can tell you, well, actually, I did that last week, but this evidence is 30,000 years ago. So we can infer what's going on today in the past, because it's still relatively the same culture. Not exactly the same, but it's the same culture. So these are stone tools used mainly for chopping, cutting and scraping are common in the area. So we get all that evidence. So what we do find is the microscopic traces on the edges of some of these stone tools that we've been finding, and the microscopic evidence on them tells us that they were used for scraping meat from bone and cleaning plant tubers. And how that survives is basically in the fats and residue on these artifacts that have survived after 30, 40,000 years. And you can do it. One of the things not to do on an archaeological site is to find a pot which has got residue on it and wash it straight away. I have the two-pronged approach. You need to wash the artifact, but you cannot wash that residue off it or all of it. So you do the pottery washing with your finger and not a toothbrush. So when that residue is dried on the pot, you can get an idea what was kept in that piece of pottery. There are other ways of doing it, more technical than that. So it's not always wise to wash your artifacts. Analyze them first, and then if there's nothing on them, then wash them. So all of these are startling finds. And this is all a startling level of finds on the basis of other discoveries that were being made before the 1970s. For example, at a place known as Kenneath Cave in Queensland in 1962, they found a cave network dating back 30,000 years ago, provided a picture of a complex lifestyle. So this is another point, Keith. They're living in cave hangs. So you got an idea where they're living and some of their transient lifestyles. So maybe in the cooler winters or in the summer months when it's boiling hot, you got sort of monsoon rains or something like that, you would go for shelter in these types of localities. So what we do see in these cave areas, which I haven't really touched upon, a rich ceremonial life, a rich sort of respectful life within the surroundings is what we're seeing. And what we are finding is that those similar sites that I'm describing, we're getting evidence now since the 1990s of sites going back to 40,000 years ago. And lo and behold, sites going back, settlement sites, occupational sites going back 60,000 years ago. Far more advanced than other similar evidences from other places on the planet. So if you want to compare this with what we know about Neanderthal civilization, right, okay, let's just chuck it in there, right? So if you look at 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals in Europe, if we see similar evidence with Neanderthals in Europe, we're always surprised, right? Well, they find this in Australia and we're sort of still surprised. And I'm thinking, well, why not? You know, why be so derogatory in thinking that this didn't happen? Or just because they're Aboriginals, it couldn't have happened. Just because of the Neanderthals, it couldn't have happened. All that crap, right? So what we've got to do, we've got to take the archaeologist out of the historian and present the evidence. So the date of the first Aboriginal occupation is of crucial importance to our knowledge of early human abilities. And most people say that Australia was never, ever conceivably connected to the Sunda Shelf. There would have had to have been a stretch of water to cross. And this is where we get a little bit technical. We'll just go back a little bit. Let's just do this bit here. A few more images, folks, and we'll be probably finishing just on the hour. So one thing I'd like to mention, right, Goff can come in with me on this one. Now, the archaeologists say, right, if you've got like a little bit of land here, land between that grey area there and that grey area is about 120, 30 miles a distance. And the water level itself in some of this landscape has risen 130, 150 meters in height, right? So that's inundated a coastline, which was up to 150, 200 miles further out back in the time. But this is what I'm going to. It's been argued that maybe 40, 60,000 years ago, when there was more ice around, that we were really close to the Sunda Shelf, and maybe there was a distance of only 30 miles, right? What I know about the sea is that the narrower channel, the more you've got a race of water, the more that the water wants to get between the two. And it's going to be very choppy. The Bristol Channel, you've got currents, really dangerous currents and all the rest of it, right? And where you've got sharp channels, you've got the water's going to be more dangerous, right? So it'd be better to cross a larger water with calmer waters at times than a narrower stretch of water. And Goff, am I talking total crap, or is that something that would be the right interpretation? Goff's not there. Okay, I'm right. Okay, so so that would be my interpretation. So archaeologists saying having a narrow channel, it's easier to get to Australia. I don't actually go with that one. But any of that's going in with mass movements of people coming from Europe. And the other thing as well is that thing that I'm thinking, right? Why would you want to go over there anyway? You can't really see it. Is it worth it? You know, and all those other questions that you need to ask. Why are they going there? Why do they need to go there? All these things, because when you think about it, right, the Sunda Shelf was some of the richest landscape on the planet before it got flooded, right? And the point is, right, if it's not being flooded and it's the ice is at its maximum, right, and there's less water and these people don't know there's going to be a flood, why don't you stay put? There's all these weird little arguments, right? So what I'd like to do, what I'd like to go next is finally, I would like to go to Victoria. So Victoria is in the south of Australia. So Victoria. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go to another locality. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to finish up all my slides, right? So we know where Victoria is, finish on my slide, dead my slides, and I want to just do this last bit, if I may, folks. And right, here we go. So we've done this landscape. Oh, right, I didn't mention this, this body itself. Yeah, we'll do all this and we'll do the Victoria stuff. So this is Mungo Man. It's the type of thing you'd have in a sort of weird movie, right? This is Mungo Man. And if you can just squint your eye, you can actually see this body itself dates to 41,000 years ago. There, red ochre, more red ochre. So this body has not only been buried with massive ceremony, in inhumation, it's intact, sort of laid out, hands over its pelvis, over their pelvis. It's been laid in a really honourable way. And this body itself, ochre being used well before the body associated with Pavilan Cave. So again, moving on. Again, more of our Aboriginal friends. And this is associated with Lake Mungo. We've got footprints in the mud, obviously. That's preserved, the last footprints, dry out, sun and all the rest of it, bake them. So we've got footprints going back as far as 40,000 years ago. And I tell you what, this is that face I was mentioning. It's absolutely beautiful face. Beautiful eyes, beautiful nose, beautiful hair, absolutely beautiful. And if we want to talk about the beauty of Aboriginals, you can look at this image, this beautiful, smiley face. and one person remarked upon something derogatory about the look of Aboriginal people, and I said, look at this, and you can't say that this image isn't beautiful. So obviously what we're talking about with lots of these sites that are excavated, like Lake Mungo, large deep sediments the archaeologists are having to go through, several meters of archaeology, more of these footprints at Lake Mungo, and that's that site that they blew up. So what I'd like to do, okay, so that's what we're going to be doing in the future. I'll do the Victoria stuff. More of our Aboriginal friends, lots of poses, lots of looks, looking into the eyes of a proper Aboriginal. And this is this is what that Tinto site used to look like. You know, it looks beautiful, and they blew it all up. You're just thinking, why? It just looks beautiful. It really looks. And there's the there are these archaeologists excavating. I think that they were excavating obviously slightly before they blew the thing up. And I think they were trying to get evidence to have the site registered as a World Heritage Site, but it's not come to pass. So there we go. Rio Tinto apologises for blowing up 46,000-year-old Aboriginal site. It's a bit bloody late now. And there it is now. There's the extraction of the iron. And there it is. It's all being bulldozed, and basically it's gone forever. So with this in the background, I just want to mention one last thing: the cow swamp people of Victoria. The one question that was asked on Tuesday was how do I know the people, those Aboriginals today, were the same people in the past? Well, the answer is when they excavated the site of Cow Swamp, KOW Swamp, south of Lake Mungo, when they excavated at that site, they found the remains of 40 individuals, men, women, and children, buried, and the characteristics, as described, were robust and rugged. And that robust and rugged nature would tie in nicely with the spell-binding nature of modern-day Aboriginals in Australia. So these finds go back to 13,000 years ago. So we see these people more or less in the same type of dream space, good word to use when we look at the art, the same type of dream space as they had 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. And on that note, with the image of Rio Tinto, we'll call that a day now. Are there any questions from any of you, please? And keep them brief, because you know, we haven't got all day. So what we're going to do, I'm going to unmute everybody. We're going to start off with Ellen, because Ellen's the one who's usually got loads of questions. Ellen, keep the questions short and statements. Go for it.
I haven't got any on this session, but I do want to ask Jane a question at the end.
Well, do you want to ask it now? Get it out of the way.
No, it was only about Cowbridge Comp. How did you know your information about that?
From one of the governors there.
And did it happen today or another day?
No, I can't tell you that. I'm sorry, no.
Okay.
I know they've all been...
It happened on Monday.
Okay, remember this is being recorded. Right, okay.
And it's Lantwit.
Yes.
Lantwit.
I said I didn't know ask it.
Okay, okay. Nothing from you, Sue, no?
No, but very good.
Thank you. What about you, Jane?
No, very interesting.
Right,
I've got to go now. I'm really...
Okay, next week we're doing Peking Man. Anyway, thanks for that, Jane. We're nearly done anyway. So if you've got to go, Jane, we'll see you next week. Anything from you, Jim? Quick. See you, Jane.
Bye, Jane.
Bye.
Bye.
No, Jim?
Yes, quickly. Bye. Yeah, one thing. If you look at plate tectonics, I mean, couldn't the land masses north and east of Australia look as though they sort of fit? So could they sort of spread apart more? Tectonics?
Yeah, what I'm talking about, if you had an early primate going to Australia earlier, they would have been able to get there.
Yeah.
Job done. Or maybe that's where evolution went from. So obviously, evolution from Australia to Africa. Oh, terrible thing to say. I can't say that. Right. Anything from you, Keith?
Was Australia ever subject to glaciation?
Yes. Not in the. It was subject in the case of water rises, but not
actually suffered.
Not ice sheets.
So evidence should be there if it was ever there and not
Yes.
have been destroyed. So if we just look enough times, we may find other evidence.
That is the point. Because of no massive evidence of glaciation, that wouldn't have been destroyed. But yeah, that is a key point. So if it's there, it's going to be found. It will be there. Chris, quickly.
Yeah, just so you're going to do anything about the art, because that's integral to the Aboriginal way of thinking.
That's a completely separate lecture.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
It has to be done separately. And what about you, Karen?
Yeah, no comments. Very interesting.
And if we got nothing else from Ellen or anybody else, what about you, Goff?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Right, I really appreciated that today. There was a great level of respect for the subject, and I thank you for that. And it was a great subject today. Looking forward to doing Peking Man and a little bit of other earlier evidence. We may chuck in Floris into next week as well. So this is how we're going to be going with the lectures now. Completely different subjects. They're not doom and gloom. Mind you, Rio Tinto is a bit of doom and gloom, but we're going to get that. So anyway, if nobody's got anything else to say, I'm going to thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, Sue, Jim, Keith, Chris, Ellen, Karen, Goff. Thanks for the articles of the week, Keith. And I'll see you all next week, babes and babe blushers and all the other lectures.
Bye-bye, Daddy.
Bye-bye, babies. Bye-bye, son. I'm glad Jim's not my son. Ta-ra, Sue.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, lovely boy.
Bye.
I tell you what, Sue, how does Keith know? Oh, never mind. I was going to say something else. Ta-ra then. Take care, Ellen.
All right, cheers.
And Michelle says thank you for the bits.
All right, okay. Yes, I'll try to come on. I'll come on that walk. You're still recording.
Hang on a minute. We're going to get it off on 3. Hang on. Let me get this off.